Okay, tell us a little bit about you, about your story. Where were you born? Your parents, your family.
Thank you. My name is Leymah, but it's a native name. It's Leymah, and it means, what is it about me? What is it about me? That is a lament. I'm the fourth of five girls. My mother never had a son. So by the time it came to me, she was really upset. And her lament to God was, what is it about me that I can't have a male child? We grew up in a peri-urban neighborhood in Monrovia. I was born in Liberia. And we lived in a mixed, multi-ethnic, multi-religious neighborhood. And we grew up really, though we live in the city, but our upbringing was more traditional in that it was a city community but with an ethnic flavor. So where in the village a child is the child of the village, where we grew up, even though we grew up in the city, we all belong to different people, not one person. So if I went to the neighbor's house and stayed till 6 p.m., they would bathe me, give me my evening bath, and send me home asleep. Mothers never send dirty children back to their parents, and you didn't go back hungry. So if you came from school and you went there, a meal was always. So I grew up in that kind of neighborhood, and there were Christians and Muslims. So when Christmas came, because my parents and grandmother were Christians, we celebrated Christmas. And then when the Muslim had a holiday, Ramadan, the Eid, Fee, everything that came Muslim, we celebrated too, because our neighbors were also. So that's the kind of neighborhood I grew up in. I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandmother, who I would really call a matriarch. She's still alive, she's 93, but very strong. My mother had five girls, my aunt had five boys. So every time there was a fight, and you as the girl went back and said, Ma, we all call her Ma, someone beat me, she said, go back and throw a punch. You were never allowed as a girl to see yourself as second to a boy. We grew up thinking, and they always said to us in our native language, if your husband brings rice, you as the woman should be able to bring the charcoal to cook that rice. So independence was a part of my upbringing, but also value of the girl child was a part of my upbringing.
So living this way of life, growing up in this way of life, when you were 17, you met the horrors of the war. How was it?
Well, because my upbringing was perfect, I would say, in that many people share stories of, I grew up in a traditional African home, and because I was a girl, I was beaten or I was treated like a second-class citizen. My sisters and I had none of those experiences. As a matter of fact, our father was one of our biggest advocates. When it came time for us, when we grew as girls, to go through the traditional process of the secret society where girls would go to do the FGM, my father said, no, my daughters are not going to be a part of that practice. So I really grew up believing in my community as peaceful, respectful of human life, respectful of the values and dignity of an individual. Children and women were respected where I grew up in my home setting. And then all of a sudden, one day, civil war. And everything I had been socialized to believe, there was no difference between ethnic group. The Civil War showed me that there was a difference. Everything that had been brought up to believe that women were respected, rape was the order of the day. Children were loved, children were being abused, used to carry guns, children were killed, different things. So it was like a 360 degrees total turn of my world. So there was a total confusion, there was anger, just not knowing where to turn. At 17, that was my word. But at the end of the day, when I put all into context, the anger was more because of the hypocrisy that I saw, the contradictions. You brought up to believe one thing, and adults' actions was showing you a totally different thing.
How was the civil war in Liberia between 1989 and 2003? 14 years of war with a little break, I think, in 1996, right? How was the spirit in Liberia building up an army with kids, with youth?
Sometimes you say to yourself, when you've gone through an experience, you don't want to relive it. 1989 to 2003 was the worst period for anyone who called himself a Liberian, anyone who was connected to that country. You woke up in the morning, and if you were alive, you said, thank God. If you went to bed at night, you were afraid you were afraid because you didn't know what the night would bring. But from the beginning of the war, things were bad. People were being killed based on their ethnicity, based on where they worked. Entire ethnic groups were wiped out. If you were part of a group that was seen as the enemy, no one knew where to go. So, for example, my parents and I were in the area that was controlled by former President Doe in the early years of the war. A common scene in those days were people who were seen to be enemies of the government, entire families were wiped out. But then also, you didn't know what to do when you live in that particular community or in that particular area. If there was someone on the job before the war who felt like you were a competition, that person could come and kill you and your entire family. So death and destruction was a commonplace. People were shot. By 2000, between 1990 and 92, I'll put it in this context. One of the imams said Liberia went from bad to worse to ridiculous. So when the war started, people were using guns to shoot and kill. By 92, 93, they were looking for imaginative ways of killing people. By 2003, some of the most horrifying ways of killing people were invented. So every year the war raged on. Every year people sat and thought, how do I make death more painful for a particular group of people? For example, the early parts of the war years, women were raped. By 2003, some of the fighters were saying their privates were too good to rape women, so they were using their knives in the private parts of women. That's how bad it got. When the war started, people when they wanted to kill you, they would shoot you. Going towards the middle of the war, if a pregnant woman from one ethnic group was coming, the fighters would bet, it's a boy child, she's carrying, no, it's a girl. They will open her up and say, you see, I won the bet. That's how horrible Liberia was. Young children who held guns, the way they were initiated, you either kill a parent or rape your mother, you eat a human heart, nasty things, terrible things. So you don't want to imagine, I personally don't want to even pray that any nation of the world goes through what we went through in Liberia.
So at that time, when you were in relationship with UNICEF, so did the UNICEF bring you a new conscience or meaning of the women's rights? And how was your life living as a refugee and homeless in Ghana?
So in 1990, by September, it was very difficult for us because we were 10, a family of 10. My father was a government official, but like I said earlier, you had to be very careful because even if you were part of the government, someone from your office could decide to kill you. So he had to go into hiding. We had no idea where he was from June up until August. We didn't know whether he was alive or he was dead. When we found him in August, we heard that there was a ship coming to Ghana with refugees and taking Ghanaian citizens. We got on that ship and came. I earlier said to you was we grew up in a very comfortable environment. So we came to Ghana, and one of the shocking realities was coming to a refugee camp, which was a deserted camp, a place where that used to be a prayer camp. So the buildings were abandoned. You would think that, okay, when we get there, there will be beds. What you imagine a reception to be. We came, and that first night, because there were no logistical arrangement, we slept in the outside of the port, the harbor of Ghana. The next day, they drove us to the camp. We got there, and the place they gave us to sleep had grass grown all there. We really had a tough time. We cried, but I am grateful for the spirit of my mother because she's the kind of person who sees every situation as an opportunity. And she turned to us and said, "Why are you all crying? There are many people in Liberia who did not make it to this place. Let's be grateful that we're alive." Next thing, she started pulling grass, making the place habitable for us. And by nighttime, we had a room, we had a place that we could call at least comfortable. The next morning, the houses had no shade. The sun in Ghana is blazing hot. So by the next morning, we had she had called the young men who she didn't know before who were living close to, and said, "Let's build a little kitchen outside with palm thatch and other things, palm branches." So she built like a little court, and that became the place where everyone would gather when the sun was hot. Next thing, she started making garden. But as a young woman, you wake up every day. Refugee life is not a pleasant life because one, you are arrested in the moment when you left your country. So we are still stuck in September 1990. And even if opportunities are provided for you, you don't want to take advantage of it because your life is. My thought at the time was, before the war, we will go back to that time. Things will get better. So you are constantly thinking about the past and envisioning a future like your past. Because of that, you are failing to accept your current reality and take advantage of anything that reality provides for you. Difficult life. My sister is pregnant. We have no money. Next thing we realize, a lot of the young people on the camp start to prostitute themselves. Men will come in their cars and they will go around. I had a friend who was my classmate when we were in junior high school. I had her number and her address, so I sent her a letter and she sent me $20 from the US. That day I received that money, I changed it and I bought flour, sugar, and oil. And I started to sell donuts. Every day, I would wake up at 5 a.m., knead my flour and make donuts. Soon, everyone knew where to come to buy donuts on the camp. So that was how, and for me, it wasn't really looking for money for myself, but it was trying to find money to save so that when my sister's baby came, we would have something to buy, decent clothes for the baby, and make him to be comfortable. And sometimes if she needed to have juice or soft drink, if she was craving as a pregnant woman, I would take some of the money from the donuts and buy it. Issues of women's rights were not something that any organization, whilst we were refugees, not UNICEF, not UN Women, had come to say, you have this right as a refugee. Few days ago, I spoke to some people from UNHCR and said to them, you all have come a long way speaking about the UN, because in the early 90s, those of us who were refugees, survivors of war, You came on a refugee camp and there were no sanitary pads for women. So if you had to sort yourself out and you had no money to sort yourself out, there were no distinction. No one was preparing bathroom for women to bathe and for men to bathe. No one was thinking about segregating people. So you had a place and an environment where young women were exploited, because if you needed little basic supplies, you either had to prostitute yourself or you had to do something negative to get it. So there were no issues of women's rights or refugee rights or anything that we knew about. We were just surviving. I don't even want to call it living. You wake up every day and say, thank you, I'm alive. Thank God I'm alive. You're just surviving one day at a time, one day at a time. Even if you have intelligence, even if you have innovation, you don't exploit it because you're just grateful to be alive. So that's the kind of life we live. I sold donuts. My mother had a tiny market kitchen. She sold oil and pepper and other things to other people. But beyond that, by the time we got there, we were 10. My mother had adopted all of our friends from Monrovia that she knew. So when we cooked, we had to feed like 20 people because there were young men who were our friends from high school who had managed to reach to the camp that were also part of our family. So in other words, she came to the refugee camp, though everything was gone, but she decided to build a community around herself. And that was also very helpful for us because it helped me as a young woman who was very young at the time not to get involved in getting in the street, but taking examples from her and really just doing my own business and being focused. But it was tough. Refugee life is never easy. No one should ever make you to think that it's easy because you've left your country and you've gone. Beyond the sufferings, you have to bear the stigma of every time you step out of the refugee camp that provides a protection for you, people will shout, refugee, go back to your country. It's not a pleasant thing. To feel unwanted in a particular place is a very, very difficult thing.
Yesterday, we went to meet, to know the refugee camp, which is still here in Accra, right? And but what we would like to understand, to know, that in your experience, you after your period in Ghana as refugee, you went back to Liberia with 3 children and no money. And then we start your fight there in Liberia. So let's understand a little your choice. Why your choice in that moment? And we know that war kills not just by arms, but also in the psychological thoughts. So war creates psychological damages. How did you interact with all of these things?
Well, I came back to Ghana as a refugee 3 times. The first time we came was 1990, September. By 91, I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to go back home. So I went back. Went back to Liberia and fell in love with someone and had 2 children. And then the war came 96. I was pregnant. We came back to Ghana. And then we came and the abuses from him continued. I left and went home. When I went home, I was on the brink of suicide because my whole life was upside down. And then my children, I had 3 children now, and I was pregnant with a 4th child. I moved back to my parents' house. My mother was very supportive, but my father was very upset, and he wanted me to leave. I should leave his house. His house was not a nursery or a daycare for children. He would not take it. And my mother would constantly appeal to him. One day she said to me, go back to school. You're smart. And like you rightly said, war does a lot of damages. Beyond the anger psychologically that I felt, The emotional abuse that I went through from the father of my children made me to lose all of my self-esteem. So I didn't have any belief in myself. I always thought I would be a failure. Because when we lived here in Ghana in 96, the only way he referred to me was stupid. And my children called me stupid. So every time if they wanted to drink, they would say, Mama, we want stupid, Mama, we want some water. So over a period, I really started believing I was really stupid. But when I left and went back home with my children, my parents took me, my mother encouraged me to go back to school. After I had my 4th child, I enrolled at a local college. It was the most difficult 3 years going to school because every day I had to wake up and encourage myself that you can make it. Every test I took and got a good grade helped me build my self-esteem. I remember there was this one time I did a paper for psychology and I really thought I had done a good job. And when the marks came, the professor had given me a D. For 2 days, I struggled with, should I approach him or am I just stupid? So on the 3rd day, I went to him and said, Sir, I think you did not read my paper and you just marked it. He looked at me and said, let me see your paper. Looked at my paper and said, is this your paper? I said, yes. I said, because I think those you mark with higher marks, my ideas are even better than theirs. I don't know where the confidence came from. And then he said, good, come back tomorrow. The next day I came and he graded my paper A+. That took my self-esteem up. But it was a real struggle for me bringing up 4 children. Let me give you an example. Every time I left the house and went to the streets, if I saw some of my friends who knew me before, I would hide. Because I felt like I was no good. I was worthless. And then sometimes some of them who I would try to interact with would make fun of me. That, wow, in 5 years you had 100 children. Those were the kinds of things that I had to go through. So it was really, I stopped going to church. I was just in the house. Just total loss of self-esteem. Well, at some point, people encouraged me. I had a friend who encouraged me and said, you are smart, you can do better. So by the time I started going to school, and one of the requirements to go to school was I had to work. So then the only job I could get was a volunteer with a program for victims of war. And my first assignment was with child soldiers. These were people I hated the most because of what they did to many people. So my first day I went to meet with them, I went and I was just saying to myself, because I have to make it in life, because I have to get a career, that is why I'm interacting with them. Nothing prepared me for what I was going to meet. I got to that place and in a dark room, it took a moment for my eye to adjust to the light in the room. Here were young children, 16, 17, 18, different forms of disability. The room smelled. And I told them that I had come to work with them. They abused me for 1 hour. There was no name that they didn't call me. And I just sat there. And then they said, come back tomorrow. The next day they abused me. And for almost 10 days or a week, I kept going and they kept abusing me until finally they said to me, can't you go away? And I said to them, no, I can't go away. I've come to work. Eventually, we started talking to each other. Then I realized that these young people that I hated the most were as much victims as I was. They had been used by older people. They had been drugged. They had been misused. They were falsely promised that if you come and fight, your life will be better. Today, like myself, all they had were scars of war. So I started working with this group of young people. We got to know each other till today. If I went to Monrovia to the supermarket and they recognized my car, all of them will come around my car because it's either someone wants to tell me that their wife has given birth again or something. But when I met those people, that was a turning point for me. It challenged me. There is evil in this world. There is evil in our country. And these young people are not the evils that we have to deal with. it is those people who financed the war, who gave them guns, who sit and plan. These are our politicians, and these are the people that we need to get to. So working with those people were the ones, in my anger at that moment, because I've been carrying this anger for a long time, but it transformed my anger from negative anger to do something to change this situation so that many other young people are not victims like these young men that you're dealing with. So that was the transformation. From that point, I met with their wives, I met their children, then I met with women who have been impacted. So it was almost like the course that I was on, it was, if you think you've been hurt by this war, meet people who've been hurt more than you. You can use your voice to change their lives. And that's how I started.
Is the war masculine?
I think the war started as a power play between masculinity, but it ended up being a feminized war. So people wanted to show power. Men wanted to show power to each other. But at the end of the day, those men did not win. No one won. And the reason why I say it became a feminized war is because the biggest brunt of the war rested on the shoulders of women. They were raped. Regardless of which side of the divide, the soldiers that were buried were their sons. They were the ones who had to wake up every morning to find food. They had to hold sick, dying, malnourished children and wash them. But then at the end of the day, they had to pocket their pains and their hurts and fight for peace. Today, they are the conscience of their communities. So the war started as a masculine power play, but ended up as a feminized war.
Why should the change should be done by mothers?
I don't know why the changes should be done by mother or whether it's the role of only of mother to make changes, but I know that mothers are the ones who suffer the most. If even your son is the biggest warlord and he's killing people, people will point it to you that this mother did not raise her son very well. Even if he's just sitting quietly, you are the one who bear it. So the change comes through mothers because one, they understand the context. One of the analogies I give is that our communities are like our homes. You know all of your children. You know what they will eat, what they don't eat. You are the one who spends most of the time with them. And you know their attitudes. As a mother, I have 6 children. If you came to me and said, my oldest son did this, he was argumentative and he was rude to his professor, I would tell you, no, that's not my oldest son because I know him. My second son, yes, he will stand up for his rights. My older son is that kind of person that says, I don't want problems. Mothers understand the context. They know when the problems start. When the war was going on in Liberia, there was no community that you went to that the women did not say, we knew there was going to be a war. Then when the war started, there were no communities where women were not the ones in the forefront negotiating for the lives of people that were going to be killed. There were no communities, including my community, where women did not wake up every morning to find food. I walked 4 hours a day to go for food every morning and walk back 4 hours every day until we left Liberia. Some of the places we went to find food, we would be in there trying to buy food and fighting would break up and everyone would lie down. After a while, you have to get up to go. So there is no experience. I've also lived through a war where my children were hungry. And as a mother, I'm the one looking at them. And they're saying to me, Mama, we need to eat. I have to eat. I'm hungry. I've lived through a war where my child was so afraid of the shooting, that even when we left Liberia and came to Ghana, if a tire fired, she would scream, and for 2 hours, she would never open her eyes. It's the mothers who see these things. But beyond that, through all of it, you don't complain to anyone. You have to be strong. You have to wake up every morning and give everyone the courage. I told you the story of when we came to the refugee camp. Whilst we were crying, my mother had to encourage us by being the first to take action to clean our space. Several years later, as a professional, I asked her, and she said to me, Leymah, you all were crying. I was crying in my heart, but I would not allow you all to see it. Because if I had cried, the rest of the group, all of you would have been hopeless. So until we spoke to her, she carried that pain and carried that grief. There are still mothers who went through the wars in Liberia who have never stopped to tell their story. I've worked with women who were peace activists, helping to treat wounded soldiers. And those women were raped by some of the colleagues of those soldiers. But it did not stop them from working for change.
Let's talk about the beginning of the women organization, in the way in the research of peace, the reunion in the soccer field, and the meeting with Charles Taylor.
Well, so after all of my experience, the experiences of women, we really decided that, it is us, the ordinary women, who suffer the most. We do not have money to travel when there's war. We do not get visas. No embassy will want to give you visa to go to their countries. So what we have seen, my entire childhood was swept away, my teenage years. It's time for us to rise up and do something. We started by creating sensitization amongst the women, going to the markets, going to the churches, and going to the mosques. And we say to them, Liberian women, wake up for peace, wake up for peace. And we did that for 9 months. And then afterwards, we came together and said, we need to do something more. By that time, 2003, it was horrible. Children who would be walking to school, a pickup would stop, throw them in, give them guns, and they go to fight. So our children were at risk even more than before. So we thought, let's do something. We decided to protest non-violently. But it was also in defiance of what Taylor had said. No one should do public protests. No one should do this. We stepped out. And when we started protesting, we took letters that we wanted to meet with him. He ignored us, and we said we'll continue until he sees us. So we chose the field, that open field in Monrovia, because that was the place he would pass every morning when he was going to work. So you will see us, and he's coming home, he will see us. So we were sitting there deliberately to say to him, the biggest victims of your war are here. Every day he passed, we were there. If it was raining, we were sitting there, no umbrella. If the sun was shining, we were sitting there, no umbrella. Several weeks later, he decided he would see us. We went to see him. Because they had a ban on public protests, he did not think that women would show up. So they had left instructions with the security that if we are 20, less than 20, he won't see us. That morning, 2,500 women, 2,500 showed up. So we went to his place, to the palace, and said, we came to see the president, and said, the security said, we have instructions that if you are less than 20, we won't let you in. And then I asked, what if we are more than 20? And he went, yes, if you are more than 20, come, because he didn't believe we'll be more than 20. And we called and told the women to form a line. All they could see was the sea of white. The women were wearing white. And it was like, oh my God, these women are really serious. We enter, and then Taylor said he will see only 10. And I said, no. If he cannot come down to see all of us, we will not see him. So they went up and told him. He said, okay, he will come down. He came down. Then they said I should read some prepared statement. And I felt like if I read that statement, I won't be doing justice to those women who were sitting there. I had to tell him the stories of those women's life. So I stood there and said to him, Mr. President, we are tired. The women are fed up. We are tired being raped. We are tired running. We are tired eating wheat. We are tired of our children being used for fighters. We want to see an end to this war. Because tomorrow our children will ask us, what did you do, Mama? As they were fighting. Mama, what did you do? At that meeting, there was no fear for me. Renewed anger. Because every time I look at him, I look at this man, and I keep saying to myself, this is the reason for all of our problems. This person is that one person, one man, responsible for all of our lives being backwards. And so, for me, I could not read because I felt like that paper was too sterile. It was too neat for him. He needed to hear from the hearts of the women, from the pains of the women, and from the pains of the women, I spoke to him.
How was the dream? Tell us about the dream you had in 2002 that you heard. Join the women and pray for peace.
Well, in 2002, I was still working with this trauma program, and this night, one of my bad habits is that I work in my head all the time. I don't know how to relax. So before I owned a computer, I had a notebook. I would jot down my thoughts all through the night. So this night, I was lying on the floor in my room, and there was no electricity, so I pushed the window, and I have the candle there, and I'm writing my thoughts. So when sleep came, I turned off the candle and dozed off with the notebook. I'm lying on the floor underneath the window, and it's as if someone was calling me. So I'm between sleep and wake because I'm very cold, because it started to rain. And then this voice is saying to me, Leymah, gather the women of the church to pray for peace. I woke up and looked around, but then again, I was the only one living in my house because my children had moved to Ghana for the third. They had come now to live in Ghana, so I was alone. The next morning, I went to work. My boss at the time was a pastor, and I said, "This is the dream that I had." And so I said, maybe we need to call the church and call the women so that they can go and pray, because for me, I'm not qualified. I'm a sinner. So that dream was for the church. It wasn't for me. So he said, no, the bearer of the dream is always the carrier of the dream. So you had the dream, you have to carry that dream. So we called the women. When we told them, the women said to me, you cannot be outside of this. You were the one who saw your dream. So we started something that every Tuesday till today at 12 o'clock, the women of the church will gather to pray for peace. Every Tuesday. There's a particular place that they go to pray. Till today, those women are still praying. We started that movement. And then the Muslim women came and said they want to follow that example. Till today, every Friday, after their Friday prayers, the Muslim women meet to talk about peace. So we started working as those two groups, and then we started the mass action. So the campaign that we started to protest President Taylor's war was started from the prayers.
we know that the sex stroke gave a great notoriety in the media, and it was important for the movement. Did it really help? How did it help?
Well, the one thing, the sex strike, the first thing it did, it drew a lot of media attention to us because it was in the early days of our work. So people wanted to know who were these women, especially African women, daring not to give their husbands sex. The men started talking too. No sex? But that was when we came up with the idea of the sex strike, it was out of frustration that we had started protesting. If you look at the armed conflict, the number of men who hold the gun versus the number of men who are sitting is less. The ones who are fighting are less than the ones who don't do anything. So what we were doing by that particular action was to kind of like energize men who were not fighters to get angry to do something. In the urban areas, we did not succeed. The women in the villages, they were smarter than we were. Because in the villages, they invited their husbands to the church and said to them, we are protesting peace. But as part of our protest, we are fasting and praying to God. And if you read the Bible and the Quran, when you are fasting, you should abstain from the pleasures of this world. So our husbands, we've called you to ask you to join us to abstain from sex so that we can fast well. And when peace comes, our lives will be better. So they packaged their sex strike into spirituality, and their husbands agreed. So for 2 years, in some of the communities where the women were protesting, there was no sex. For us in the urban areas, we weren't smart enough. So we went and said sex strike, and some of the men started getting angry with their wives, and at some point we had to call it off. But the impact of that sex strike, even in Liberia, was that the media now wanted to know who were these African women saying no to sex to their husbands.
Okay, in the peace, let's talk about the peace conference and the attitude you and the other women had. How was to embrace the room, embrace the palace where the groups were, and to refuse to exit till the peace were signed.
When we came to the peace talks in 2003 June, we came with a lot of hope that it was going to be 2 weeks, because people had shown to us that we're tired, we want peace. And then we came to the peace talks, and what we saw was a total mockery of peace and democracy. People who had come to negotiate the peace evening time were sitting down, 10, 15 bottles of beer, men drinking, young girls in short clothes, reviewing everything sitting by them. It was like holiday. It wasn't like life was spoiling or people were dying in a particular country. So you read the news, 200 people died today. They're here collecting money for per dimes, living in nice hotels, being driven by escort cars, and our people are dying. There's no food. But none of these people had the conscience to say, let's hurry up. Let's be serious. They were benefiting. And the entire time it was about who's going to be the Minister of Finance, who's going to control the diamond mines, who's going to control this. And if there was no understanding, there was no peace. So this day, I wake up and I read the news that a missile had landed to a place where people were displaced. A young girl who had just given birth the night before was killed. 2 little boys, brushing their teeth, were crushed like meat. I sat there, I cried, and then I got angry again. So I went to the peace hall and told them, let's send for women from the camp. The peace hall is here. The camp is like 45 to a 1 hour away. The women came, and by the time they entered the hall, we blocked the hall and said the only people we would let to come out were the foreigners. The Liberians will remain there, no food, no water, no access to bathroom, so that they understand what the ordinary people were feeling in Liberia. The security people came and said they were going to arrest me. Why? I was obstructing justice. At that moment, everything I had been socialized to believe crumbled. Men will protect women. Children will be protected. Good will overcome evil. I'm standing there looking at these men saying they will arrest me, and I'm asking myself, all I'm trying to do, all these women are trying to do, is fight for the rights of their country, fight for the rights of their children, fight for the dignity to live without being raped. All we are trying to do is to save our nation. And I'm the terrorist today. My integrity, by even just being arrested, was being taken away. My pride. So I said to the security man, since you want to arrest me, I'll make it easy for you. I'll strip naked. And my stripping naked was in protest of the disgrace of humanity that I had seen from 1990 to 2003. My stripping naked was in protest of all of the evils that women had gone through. My stripping was in protest of the hypocrisy of our world, that we will protect the unarmed. So I was protesting that this world, evil is always seen as good and good is seen as evil. When I started taking off my clothes, the security men left me and ran away. Some of the men came and said, don't do this. But we stayed there until the media had come. Everyone was covering, were saying we will not leave. After that, 2 weeks later, peace agreement was signed.
This way of fighting, do you consider this way of fighting a feminine way of fighting?
I consider this way of fighting the most powerful way of fighting. And the most powerful way of fighting is usually the way women fight. People think that non-violent struggle is easy. They think that it's a women's fight. But non-violent struggle is the most powerful struggle. If you look at Gandhi, if you look at King, if you look at Mandela, not many people have that spirit after you've done me wrong to still engage with you. After you've done me wrong, to still be nice and show a hand to you. That is the most powerful fight the world can see and the world will ever see. The women of Liberia, from that time till today, that fight was not just protests up and down. It was looking those who killed your children in the eye and them needing your hand and saying to them, come, I will introduce you back to the communities. And going back to the communities and saying to them, these are our children. We need them if we have to build a peaceful society. Not many people can do that. It's a powerful fight, but it's the kind of fight that women choose to fight. So to answer your question, we are powerful because we choose to fight the powerful fight. Why do we celebrate Gandhi? Why do we celebrate King? Why do we celebrate Mandela? We say they are powerful men. Should we have difficulty celebrating women? No. Because what King Mandela and Gandhi has done is what you see women do every day in their communities. They too should be celebrated.
Only 2 questions. Why you?
I don't know why me, but I know that my style is if I see a problem, I don't ask questions. It has to be rectified. I jump into it. That's me. Why me? I don't know. But I know also that there was a problem in my country. And there was someone needed. And when the women said, it's you, I couldn't say no.
What is this, your power?
I don't think I have any powers, but my faith in God and His ability to lead me is where I draw my strength from. By myself, as Leymah sitting here, I'm nothing. But when I depend and believe that with God, He gives me that strength. He gives me the courage to rise up and look people in the eye and speak. I tell you, when we protested, there was not a day that I went to speak that the women did not put me in a circle and pray and say, God, give her utterance, give her boldness, give her good words to say. There is nowhere in this world that I go to speak that I don't pray before I speak. Because I believe that the power in anyone is God. That person that you know him to be. No one possesses any power. There are many, and if you look at me, where I come from, it's unfortunate that you didn't go to Liberia to see where I grew up. Humble background, humble beginnings. No riches affiliated with my family. And when you look and track all that I've been through, the only conclusion I come to, it is the doing of God and not man. That's my conclusion.
Thank you. Eu teria muito mais perguntas para fazer, porque eu sou um grande fã dela, mas eu sei que o tempo dela nós já até abusamos, agradecemos a generosidade e é isso.
Carlos is saying that he would have much more questions to ask you, but we know that the time is okay. He's a great fan of you, of your work, as we are, and just to say thank you for your speech.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for taking up the time. I'm really humbled that you decided to include me in your production, and I hope, my biggest hope is that my life, my story will inspire a girl in Brazil who is going through problems, who think that life is over for me. I have children, I have no education, I'm from a poor background, or some woman who's going through violence. If I leave this husband, what will happen to me? Look at me, I'm an example. I left 4 children, no husband, no money, poor background. Today, I'm a Nobel laureate. To God be the glory, but also to every woman out there, search in yourself. There is a strength that you have. Until you search deep, you will not find it. Deep search, you'll find that strength to get out of that situation that you find yourself in. Thank you very much.